I've been paying attention to all the stupid fear-mongering about college students protesting Israel's blatant ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, and it's really been making my blood boil. These students have been smeared as violent agitators when most of the violence has been coming from Zionist counter-protesters and, of course, the police. You have pundits and politicians alike also saying stupid shit like all these protesters are Hamas supporters. The reason they're so vocal about their opposition to Israel is because they hate Jews. You also had Tom Emmer, a Republican from Minnesota who serves as the majority whip in the House of Representatives, going so far as to say these students support Hitler's final solution. This is a source of mass hysteria in this country that is unifying both Republican and Democratic politicians, and this really isn't all that different from Red Scare bullshit during the Cold War. People who were college students during the Vietnam War and were protesting that conflict were also smeared to no end. They were also seen as radical communists who want to see the America as we know it destroyed, which doesn't really sound all that bad to me, but for the most part, these were college students who didn't like the fact that we were fighting in a pointless war we had no business fighting, forcing many civilians to partake in said pointless war, resulting in so much unnecessary death for what ended up being a gigantic geopolitical failure. Now that history has vindicated those who protested Vietnam, you have universities like Columbia providing apologetics and acknowledging that they shouldn't have cracked down on students protesting on their campuses. But now in the current day, we see pro-Palestinian protesters treated exactly the same as those who protested against the Vietnam War. Hamilton Hall, a building on Columbia's campus, has been occupied by protesters. This same building was occupied by students who were protesting during the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War. Columbia holds up those instances of students engaging in direct action as proud moments of the university's history. But since Israel genociding Gaza is an ongoing conflict, and public outcry against this atrocity threatens U.S. hegemony, because both Republican and Democrat politicians are so gung-ho on arming and funding Israel. You see universities and the police force and politicians and news and political commentators all unify when it comes to scrambling to discredit these protesters. Like, for example, you had a deputy from the NYPD hold up a chain and say, "This is not something normal that students bring to school. This is something professionals would use as a weapon," when the chain he is holding up is just a bike chain. Literally a bike chain you can buy at a store that is in Columbia University's campus. But these are the usual smear tactics that are always used against protesters when the status quo is threatened. But these bullshit peddlers can't just be honest and say these are just students protesting in favor of the end of the ethnic cleansing of a group of people who have been colonized and pushed off more and more land that was originally theirs for decades at this point, because how would that make them look like anything else but the bad guys? So they have to make up stupid smears like these students are using bike chains that they bring with them on campus every fucking day and can literally buy on campus as weapons. And these students are Hitler supporters who want to see Jews eradicated. It is all a desperate, pathetic attempt to demonize these students and to get the general public to not sympathize with them. It is just a stupid scare tactic meant to divert away from what these students are protesting against. Clear-cut genocide. And to make critiquing Israel's atrocities seem less palatable to the public, they have to make it seem like those who are vocally in opposition to Israel's actions are all violent agitators who love terrorism and want to see Jewish people dead, when that is absolutely not the fucking case. Again, they do not want you to pay attention to the slaughter of innocent Palestinians. They want those who oppose genocide to seem like the irrational ones, and not those in our fucking government who uncritically support it. And one more thing I want to discuss is Joe Biden's appalling speech where he discusses the student protesters. He repeats the same trite about the pro-Palestine protesters instigating violence while completely ignoring counter-protesters and the police continually escalating tensions. He also condemns the quote-unquote lawlessness of these protests. Lawlessness, you say? Lawlessness like like Israel using white phosphorus on Palestinian civilians, which is defined as a war crime by international fucking law. Spare me on the talk of lawlessness. You've been happily supporting Israel's lawless behavior every step of the fucking way for the past 7 months at this point. He also says we are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent. The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues. But neither are we a lawless country. We are a civil society, and order must prevail. Dissent is essential to democracy, but dissent must never lead to disorder or to denying rights of others so students can finish the semester and their college education. Dissent must never lead to disorder is quite the mask-off line. If you want to talk about disorder, what about the marches during the civil rights movement? You don't think those closed down streets and inconvenienced other people? Or what about Rosa Parks refusing to leave her seat and having to go to the back of the bus just because of her skin color? This was Jim Crow era America. That was considered illegal at the time. These are two examples that are routinely co-opted by right-wingers and moderates to smear modern-day protesters and say, see, these are examples of peaceful protests, unlike what you're doing. But at the time, there were acts of defiance against the status quo, considered disorderly, and were scrutinized in mass. Protesting by its very nature is disorderly. You're taking a stand against what a government or a large entity in general stands for. Acting in defiance of authority is how you get your message heard. Do you really think the civil rights movement would have been as effective and monumental as it is had protesters not done things like block traffic or defy segregation laws? If you really think so, then you are deluding yourself. Those who are smearing anti-Israel protesters today would have absolutely smeared civil rights era protesters and Vietnam War protesters, because they are going by the exact same playbook those who smeared protesters during those eras went by. And if Biden loses a significant portion of the youth vote, a key demographic he needs to win in November, and if he ends up losing to Trump as a consequence of his unwavering support for Israel and demonizing protesters who just want to see genocide end, then that would be no one else's fault but his own. Fuck Biden. That's all I have to say. Bye-bye.